Religion has a long, dark, and shameful past and present in human societies. From the torture and murder of apostates, heretics, and atheists, the murder of people of different religions, warfare between people in the same society or between countries, witch burning, the present religious and civil wars in the Mideast, Africa, and elsewhere, the abuse of women and children and animals, one can see very little about religion that is adaptable. I do not believe we will ever see hard evidence for the desirability of the continuance of religion in the world. I am very thankful to the secular anthropologists and scholars who labor on to find the true origin of religious beliefs. It may not be one source, but a combination of all the theories we have traversed this evening. The more we learn about the enduring falsehood of religion, the more we can find methods to finally marginalize its presence and effects in our contemporary world. Thank you for your attention tonight.
Thank you.
Very good, very good.
Is Buddhism a religion? Why or why not?
Well, it is, that's interesting because we were using the idea of a belief in God and a belief in immortality. I'm not sure some Buddhist religions, or some, I don't want to say sects, what do I want to say?
No, sex.
All right, some sects then of Buddhism don't have a belief in God, and others do have some kind of belief in some kind of thing. And most of them embrace the idea of some kind of, life after death, that continuance of life in another body, etc.
Well, what do you say as an atheist to a Buddhist who approaches you and he says, or she says, oh, it's not a religion really, this is a philosophy, and I want you to study it with me, and you'll see how helpful Buddhism is to your life as an atheist. What would you say to them?
Well, I studied a little bit of Buddhism because I've had friends who have encouraged me in that direction, and I just find it doesn't work. Number one, first of all, I can't accept the idea that there's some kind of universal force or karma or whatever, and also this idea of inhabiting one body after the other until you eventually, achieve enlightenment, and then it's over. You get off this wheel of suffering, of life. I just find it, kind of absurd.
I would think the future bodies to be occupied would consider that rather rude.
Well, not really. You're kind of born into them. As a baby is born,
Yes,
your soul enters into them,
Yeah.
or whatever. And secondly, they have the same ascetic ideas as Christianity does, and everything.
But they would claim that they too are atheists. They say, oh, we don't believe in
Only some of them.
deity. But even Buddha would have been a metaphysical being, but not a all-powering, or certainly not a creator.
No, and they took a lot of his ideas and added things to them, like a lot of the popular Buddhist religions, have angels and demons and all that.
They're almost derivatives.
Yeah, they are. They're derivatives. It was the people that came after him. I think if he was an actual person, which we wonder.
See, I'd like you to do hopefully a whole lecture on Buddhism, because,
Well, I think what I'll probably do is like unbelief in Buddhism.
well, certainly,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of propaganda out there that's trying to spread Buddhism. You have a lot of Jews or former Jews becoming Buddhists and saying it is the answer to everything that Judaism was not. And then, like I say, I get approached by people in the skeptics community that say, oh, I'm studying Buddhism, and you really ought to study it, and you won't disagree with any of it because you're an atheist.
You will.
But I will, but I don't have enough knowledge myself. I would like to be able to refute it with the knowledge. And I have certainly listened on to the teaching companies, a couple of lectures on Buddhism, but guess what? It's taught by a Buddhist.
Yeah, but actually that's a good way, because then you can spot the flaws in it.
Yeah, but I think he dumbs down some of the more
They do.
more
They do.
religious side of it into some of this more philosophical approach to life.
Well, they are a little more philosophical. As far as I'm concerned, if you're going to go into a religion, it's probably maybe one of the best ones. But
But why?
why need it?
Yeah.
Why do we need it?
Or if you're an eclectic philosopher, you would not limit yourself certainly to that Eastern thought.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
but that's what they're trying to say.
There's some
They're
kind
saying-
of force thing that they believe. There's some kind of something in the universe. I mean, even the most atheistic ones. Because how do you get that transmission?
transmission.
And now a lot of American Buddhists are saying, oh, we don't bother with that concept. It's like the Christians, oh, we don't want to bother
That
with
part
that.
of the Bible.
Oh, we don't concentrate on that. Well then, what are you doing? I mean, that's the religion is based on
And
that.
it's rather interesting that Buddhism, like
I hate that
all
religion.
religion, is exclusionary. They want to exclude things, and you just concentrate on this,
Oh,
and it'll
selective.
really help you.
Picking, yeah. Yeah, okay, well, perhaps you'll consider that as another topic.
I'm gonna do unbelief. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do unbelief in most of the, like large religions like Hinduism.
Well, yeah, I don't expect you to try to sell me on it. Yeah.
And another thing too, the Buddhists cannot accept the chaos theory, and they cannot accept randomness,
Randomness.
random selection.
No.
That's a good point.
Yeah, but some
Now-
of them now, the modern ones might say that they do, and this is the trouble. They're starting to eliminate
Then they're
their core
then they're-
belief
then they're-
systems.
They're chameleons.
Plus, I also too, I honestly think that what they think is enlightenment and peace of mind, I honestly think it's an illusion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't know how the human mind can just exist, no matter what they say their practices, even maybe for a second, but in the now. And because our mind is like a continuum. We go from past to present to future. We can't help it. It would probably be better to live in the now.
But what would you say to them when they say, no, this philosophy is superior to the Western philosophers, of the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment?
I think it's very simplistic compared to it, but it depends, what you're into. I've had many of these quarrels with my good friend Paul Bransberg, who was a Buddhist. And we ended up nowhere.
As you usually do in a religious discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
With a true believer.
yeah.
Do you think that we can use the primitive religions to point out the fallacy of religion in general?
That's a good question.
So that if a Christian knows that there have been 100,000 religions existed before Christianity, doesn't that say something
No.
about religion?
No, I found out when I was very young that, when I argued from that point of view, that they felt that it proved the fact that religion was true. It had just, that we had developed our ideas about it. But the fact that there was this religion before shows that people, that there was some, idea of a God or what have you.
But
or
they were
gods.
wrong.
Yeah, I
you
know,
like-
but we see, we got more, started to understand more, and then we got to this, like, monotheistic understanding, and we worked at all these things out. I find that when people want to believe,
They're gonna believe
They're
it.
gonna-
it's impossible. So I realized as a young woman, I said, this doesn't work.
Don't go anywhere.
Because what I had learned and what they had learned, we had drawn different conclusions from it, because I was an unbeliever and they weren't. So I said, well, I don't think it's a valid argument to use.
So those anthropologists that you mentioned that are secular, they've already decided to be secular, and now they're studying anthropology.
Yes, yeah. Most of them are pretty secular, even the ones that think religion is adaptationist. I think that they think it's good, and this is what irritates me terribly. I mean, it's just like they're discounting this dark history.
The record speaks to it for itself.
Now, you said that Durkheim and Freud were pointed out for their inaccuracies, but I don't think you explained to me what those inaccuracies were.
Yeah, I did.
Can you elaborate, please?
Yeah, well, okay, Durkheim's whole thing of the totem, first of all, I said researchers have not found any, they've been out in the field a long time now, and they haven't found any dichotomy between sacred and profane that he said he had found, with the totem and then the secular world, and then the totem is the sacred world. They didn't find anything like that. Secondly, the whole totem thing, he was all wrong about, because he depended on, what were their names, Streatham and whatever, and they were all wrong.
All wrong about.
They were all wrong about the totem theory, because they had depended, remember I was reading that about how Ted Strelo, that knew the language and had grown up with them, because his father was a missionary, Strelo found out that the things that these field researchers that Freud and Durkheim and Fraser and everything were depending on were incorrect. They had depended on young guides that only like knew pidgin English, and they were transmitting like incorrect things. And the elders had not even let these young guys into the sacred mysteries.
But,
So when Strelo was let into that because they knew him, he was like twin brothers with one of them and what have you, from native rights when they were children. When they let him in on these things, then he realized that they were all wet.
But he was not one of the practitioners of these religions?
No, oh no, he was a proper English gentleman. Yeah.
Because it seems to me that perhaps this is just an apology because, they didn't like what Freud had to say. I'm gonna have to get some tea.
Okay, no, I don't think it was that at all. I think it was the fact that,
That they didn't worship their ancestors? Of course they worshiped.
Well, yeah, but they did, but you see now, like this idea of this, how the child is born, it was like, they were going on that, and I remember reading old anthropological books like that, and I think certain tribes didn't know how what the father contributed to,
To
the
birth.
child, yeah, to the nescience, the conception of the child. But, I think sometimes they were pulling their leg a little bit, or there was a misunderstanding of language or interpretation. Indeed, these Arunta people knew about the father's contribution. So that whole thing
Yeah.
about the totem spirit entering into the mother, and that's what she, that's where she got the idea of the totem for their family, blah, blah, blah. It was just all wet. There were a whole bunch of concepts.
But the idea of virgin birth is not unique to that. It's
No.
found all over the world.
No, well, yeah, but I don't know if you'd even call it virgin birth. I think that they knew that the couple was having intercourse, but it was not the father's contribution, it was the totem that entered in. I don't think there was any question, but I'm not sure actually, so I shouldn't say at that point.
Now, you didn't mention Young. Do you feel that he was not a contributor to this discussion?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I've read a lot of Jung, and why I didn't mention him was that he was religious, so, how much was he going to contribute to this? He believed in these, what did he call them? The collective unconscious, and he believed that, when we dreamt and things like that, we were like calling not on our personal psyches, but also on this collective unconscious in the human mind. Also, that's pretty Western mind oriented, I think.
But what would he say about primitive religions then?
Oh, geez,
That that's
what did he
also
say?
just collective
Yeah,
unconscious?
No.
yeah, partly your own psyche, but collective unconscious. I think he's been more useful for literature and art and things.
But
No,
not useful for the origins of religion?
No, I would not use him because he's a proponent really of religion in a sense.
Okay.
And he was a proponent of mysticism, I think, in a sense, spiritual. He's
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked reading him, but,
What about the story of the cargo cult?
Oh,
From
that
World War
is
II?
funny. I know, yeah, where these Westerners had come and they had left things on islands, and sometimes cargo cults would grow up
Yeah.
around them, and they would worship these items,
Has anyone done any real serious studies?
I don't think that they've done enough serious study of it. I see it mentioned, every so often when I'm reading about,
Yeah.
theories about religion, but it seems like a dead end. I mean, like this island developed it, that island developed it, and, it didn't go any further.
Well, but it's it would have to be a very young religion.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I've now seen it used as a cultural illusion for anything that is, hyped up technology that's more than what it deserves to be.
Okay,
It becomes a cargo cult
okay, I didn't,
in the software world.
okay.
So,
I wasn't aware of that, that's
This
interesting.
is brand new. This is
That's
just now.
great,
They
really.
call it, this is a cargo cult.
That's cool.
Surrounded, and find this artifact. Somebody comes up with it's true technology, but then they attributed something to the great future that's gonna happen, like, you know, we're gonna be flying around on cars and hovercraft.
How funny.
Mhm.
It's just a silliness,
Mhm.
okay,
That's good to know, Norm.
yeah.
Will just be brains floating around.
Yeah, this idea that you take a small piece of technology and you extrapolate it into something much more, you deify it
Mhm.
to much more than what it really is. It's what the cargo
It's a
cult
stream.
people were misinterpreting what they saw, you know, in these cargo vessels. I'm glad you mentioned E.O. Wilson. Now, I have also read his book, Social Conquest of Earth. I don't recall him being a provisional deist.
I was researching him and there's an interview where he says it himself.
He was raised a Methodist.
Very recently, he
And-
said he was a provisional deist.
All right, do you have a citation for that?
I'm sorry I don't, but if you just Google it, you're gonna find it. Just Google some interviews.
Okay, 'cause
with
I
him. Or
really-
say E.O. Wilson, atheist, you know, like question mark, or.
You know, just for our own cause, I think it would be important to cite that, because people would like to slander him in ways, you know, to dismiss his overall concepts. I think that he is very important, you know, in the discussion.
He may be right too, I mean, I don't know, I don't accept the,
Well, I don't think he's right about
Yeah.
deism, but,
no, I
He-
mean, you know, like group selection rather than kin selection.
okay.
I don't buy it because so many experts don't, but he could be right, he's been right before and everybody was wrong, so, you know, I mean, I'm not dismissing, you know, him, but I am concerned with this, and he's not one of the people, he's very critical of religion.
Yeah, but he would say that religion had utility at
Yeah.
one time,
Yeah,
but now does
yeah,
not. That's,
Yeah.
I remember that very clearly
Yeah.
from his book, and I would have remembered if he had said anything different.
yeah, no. Well, these other guys, though, these other guys wanna carry it on,
All
the
right.
fact that it's useful now.
What's that old phrase, oh, it's time to evolve beyond that?
Yeah, and they don't wanna evolve beyond that, you know, they're very soft on religion as far as I'm concerned.
How much would you say that Freud was a pioneer versus just repeating what had already been said by others?
Well, he repeated what others said. I mean, I think that he had read Dostoevsky pretty thoroughly, if I recall, and he must have been familiar with, you know, Feuerbach, you know, and other thinkers. I'm sure he was quite familiar with a lot of other thinkers, but still, really, the way he put things together, don't you think that he was kind of a groundbreaker?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love that book,
Yeah.
and, you
Yeah.
know, I've studied it, but
Yeah.
I wasn't sure in the context, you know, of his time, what really was original. I know his psychoanalytic theories were original, but he really went far beyond, you know, his theories of psychology, personality,
Yeah.
individual neuroses,
Yeah.
when he talked about the origins of religion.
Yeah.
So that's why I was wondering what else was he drawing upon when he wrote that book?
Well, obviously, he was drawing upon, you know, the totem theories, and, you know, he has Ann Arbor, I think was it their Natural History Museum or their Historical Museum? They had an exhibit of things, you know, that he had collected. He was very interested in, you know, primitive things and in Greek mythology. So, you know, he had an extensive cultural background that he had, you know, compiled in his mind from his reading and from, I think, you know, tales that he had heard, and, you know, he synthesized all those.
Mhm. He was the one, though, that probably popularized the idea that childhood is another form of the primitive culture.
Yeah,
And then, so when you talk about the origins of religion, I think that's probably where he came up with this idea that children would be the ones to believe in these religious beliefs. And you said later in your lecture that no, there's no evidence for
they're
that.
not finding that, no, but yeah,
Because that would be another place where I think people would dispute that and say, oh no, children have a natural spiritual sense.
no, they're not finding that at
See,
all.
but the Christian apologists, they're publishing that.
Well, they're publishing it, but they're also publishing that we were a Christian nation too.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, they make up things just like they make up their religious beliefs. But these researchers, I mean, are being very meticulous, and they're not finding this spontaneous Yeah.
Yeah.
Religiosity in children. This is very important, I think.
Well, but that was one of Freud's analogies. He said it's just the religion that we have today is this childhood that we
Yeah, I
see
don't-
in children and we see in primitive people.
It doesn't seem to. It seems that from what they've been finding, that the children need testimony from their
And the
elders.
testimony comes from the parents and the
Yeah, elders in the
significant
community, significant
adults in the
adults
community.
and things in the community. So we still don't have this idea of spontaneous religion. I mean, it may well be for some reason, but we're not seeing it in children. I mean, why aren't we seeing it in children? I mean, they've really done a lot of research. They're very, very good.
Could you define again mortality salience?
That's awareness of mortality, that's all, understanding of death,
Which would have occurred at what age in a child's life?
Well, that they're not talking about. They're talking about like making people really aware of death in these studies, and these are adults.
But why wouldn't they have already been aware?
Well, they're aware of it, but like, they kind of pound it in.
Because the premise of the study was though that the people who are aware of it become superstitious, and the ones that aren't aware of
But
it.
see, they're already religious. They're already religious, but
Yeah.
the more that they're made aware of like the aspects of death, okay?
Yeah.
I think that they, kind of pound it in, make them talk. See, people don't think about death.
You mean
very
during
much.
the interview?
Yeah, during the study.
During the study?
During the study.
They make them aware of.
Very aware, by, I think telling them different concepts of death and this and that and
Okay,
everything.
so I misunderstood.
But you see, the catch is that these are mainly Christians. And even when they're not, they're already religious.
And these superstitions, though, do these follow straight from their religion, or are these
No,
beyond?
that's what was fascinating in study 3 and 4.
Uh-huh.
That they not only like decided that Buddha was okay when they were confronted with that, but then number 4, they even thought shamanic ideas were good.
Even though they were Christians?
Yeah, even though they were Christians. So this was kind of shocking to everybody.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting because
Yeah,
it
it's
says
strange.
that religious people also can hold these superstitions
Right,
beyond their just religion.
right, right.
And I think of my mother was very superstitious in ways that didn't really have anything to do with Judaism.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing in the Greek culture, and I think you'll probably find in, a lot of cultures, the same thing. Yeah, it had nothing to do. In fact, I know in the Greek culture, the priests used to try to discourage such, folk beliefs. And it had no impact on a lot of the older people. Not once, so they kept their belief and they kept their Christianity, and that was it.
Well, when my mother was a devout Catholic, she was a salt freak. Spilled the salt.
Yeah.
Sure, that's a good.
So how do we explain that? If they're already believing in a God that's going to protect them, what difference does it make whether you spilled the salt or didn't spill the salt?
Talk to them.
Yeah, double
Double
protection.
That's right.
I think I read, I can't remember if it was in Consumer's Report or another thing that I read, but I read that Americans use, all these natural remedies and what have you,
Yeah.
and yet at the same time, they also go to the doctor.
Like crazy.
And
Yeah.
I know I had a former hairdresser who would do both.
Yeah.
And she would like swear by both, and
Yeah,
and
the
it
doctors
was,
hate
yeah.
that.
So they have they're spending double money because they're not compensated in insurance usually when they go to these natural, kind of things. But it's like a double insurance. I think maybe it's the same thing.
I think that should be studied. Really
Yeah.
do. I
Oh,
think
yeah,
that-
and double insurance also carries over into the extreme use by Christians and believers in the medical facilities.
Overuse?
Well, yeah, because if they're getting close to death, they're the one, they can go to heaven. They've been brought up with
That's
it.
what cracks me
So why
up.
are they going to heaven?
Yeah, I hate that when they're
But
scared. I
Yet,
just
when they're
hate
going to
that.
heaven, and why are you worried about it then? But, no, I have to have this operation, I have to have that operation, I have to have that operation. Let's just go to heaven.
This
Yeah.
lady used to come
You
into
can
my
save money.
shop, and she
And
was
you'll
telling
save
me
money.
how terrific, her church was. They're always trying to convert you and everything. I used to just, kind of blow her off, and how happy it made her, how calm she was. And then she needed something, which is scary. I mean, I was scared when I had one too. She needed a hysterectomy. And she was in my head, she was shaking, and she was saying, and I felt sorry for her, but at the same time was aggravated. I'm the one that should be scared, I'm thinking. I don't believe in anything. She believes that if something goes wrong, she'll go to bloody heaven. Get off my back, lady.
Well, maybe she saw it as punishment, that she was being punished.
It's possible. I used to try not to encourage people's, opinions on things, religious opinions, because then they would never leave the shop, I had things to do, but.
Maybe you already answered this, but how could one possibly be a believer as an anthropologist?
Why not?
We were talking earlier though about how you study these ancient religions that have disappeared, by the hundreds and thousands of them. And
They're
all of
still
that.
disappearing.
How
There's new
could you-
religions all the time that just fall by the
Yeah,
wayside.
but as someone who's supposed to be studying these, how could you possibly come away with thinking that you still have the one valid religion out of all the ones that failed?
Well, when we were talking with somebody we went to dinner with recently, someone's name came up that had been a Greek priest and then became a professor. And I can remember an interesting conversation I had with that gentleman, who was a very learned person. And he was telling me about the ancient documents, because he read ancient Greek and many languages, ancient languages, and how the early writings on Jesus from the early church, even in the Greek, they used the same term that they were using for Dionysus, a favorite god of mine from the pagan time, and I was fascinated. And I asked him about that, and it hadn't shaken his faith at all. He said that, again, we had come to a more sophisticated understanding that this was the beginning, and that people, had this. He had no doubt, or if he did, he didn't show it to me. He had, it was just, when I heard that, it reinforced for me the fact of how this was this dying and reviving God's thing. And that Jesus was one more, figure in that. And to him, it was a continuum of people becoming more refined and learning more about, the one true God and the Trinity and everything.
Good, because if that's what's happening, sir, what's to prevent it from going on into the future?
Maybe, or maybe, I'm trying to think, Hegel, maybe he thought, remember Hegel thought that spirit had finally reached its apotheosis in German culture? Freud called it, Bertrand Russell called it jellied thought.
Jellied thought?
Jellied thought, that was
Jellied
great.
thought.
Yeah, spirit had somehow, progressed through the nations, and then this great German nation that was, and we know,
Had
of
come
course,
to rest.
had come to rest there, and that was it. And I think, what's his name? Fukuyama, didn't he write the thing about the end
The end of
of
history.
The end of history? About that didn't last very long, but it was the American culture, and we had reached this apotheosis. So that happens quite often, so why not think that now we have reached the apotheosis of Christianity or religion?
But what serves to prevent it from going on, because it
that's-
went on before?
Well, no, because now you've reached the top, now
I
you've
see.
reached the thing.
Right.
But he believed it, and he was not a stupid man. He was very, very smart. I'm sure he was smarter than I was, like in IQ and certainly in what he had accumulated in learning. Why did we reach different
Yeah, but
conclusions? I have no idea.
history belies it.
Of course it does, but he believed it very sincerely, and he wasn't a fool.
There goes pride.
If you want to say that, I mean, but there you have it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I have found over and over and over in my life, and that's what's discouraged me from, if other people want to try to talk, people out of their religion, I think that that's well and good, but I can't stand to do it. It drives me insane. It's like I'm hitting this brick wall of some kind of,
First of all, they aren't going to budge.
well, no, they're not. unless they already have doubts, and I don't think people like that have doubts. Or if they do, they keep them to themselves. Now, you know, darn, I mentioned it in one of my talks, and I can't remember. He's a great historian of the Victorian era, and he found in a lot of these muscular Christians, you know, these Victorian Christians, you know, onward and upward, and you know, God is with us, and let's get out on the playing fields of Britain and everything. He found a lot of private doubts in their journals and things, and I found that very interesting. You know, to read his book on that. I said, aha, I knew it, you know. I knew that they had doubts. And they tried to repress them in themselves, and they certainly didn't want to pass them on to other people. So, I don't know what to say other than they believe it, maybe. And we don't. And that, I don't know why we think this way and they think that way.
Well, keep working with AtheistScholar.org.
Do you
And
think I'll
YouTube.
come to an answer? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's interesting. I was just reading Freeman's Closing of the Western Mind, and I got a chuckle. I mean, it's a little off topic, but not really. In that, because it's again about religion and how it's non-adaptationist, and when Christianity started to become like in the majority, you know, Constantine the emperor adopted it in about 315 or 321 and made it the official state religion, but that's because so many of them were already in the majority, and he wanted, and I found out from Constantine on, and I didn't really know this, I knew that they had set a lot of, you know, doctrine. But I didn't realize, one of the reasons they were doing that was the Christians were so contentious. And he used to write to them about that, how awful they were and how horrible they were. And so, you know, it's going to be as I say. This is what the emperor would say. And so he would probably pick the sect that had the most punch, or he could do the most with, and that was it. We're going to settle the Trinity. That's it, you know. And then his sons did it, and his descendants did it for a good long time.
But did that set the stage for the schism with the Orthodox?
Yeah, oddly enough, yeah, it did, because the Nicene Creed actually didn't work that well that they set about the nature of the Trinity. And it gets so complex. I mean, I went crazy when I was reading Freeman, because I said, oh, really? You know, I'm kind of sorry I tackled this, you know. And yeah, so they were still arguing about it, even in the West. But the Greeks did not really ever accept this idea, totally. And so on these little bits of Trinity dispute, it started the split that came. You know, part of it was also the authority of the Pope. They didn't believe in it. But oddly enough, now Freeman was quite an expert, and I mean, he certainly, the book is well regarded. Freeman seems to think that the Greek church is really the original one, not the Western church. That the Western Empire was in fragments, and I do remember that from my history. And that it was the Greek church that endured until, you know, the fall of Constantinople when the Turks came through. So he has a different spin on it. I never thought about that. So that I find that very interesting. You know, maybe I should have listened more to the Orthodox prelates and what have you.
When you were speaking about Daniel Dennett, you mentioned belief in belief. Could you explain what that means?
Yeah, the fact that, you know, people like to have belief in their beliefs, you know. It becomes self-perpetuating. Like he says that they're the stewards of their beliefs then, too. And I see that happening when I read the closing of the Western Mind. You have this stewardship of belief.
But isn't that just a tautology? I mean, what were you really explaining by saying
Nothing.
something like that? You're not really explaining.
Nothing, no, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. He's just describing these tendencies that we have as you know, human beings. It's very depressing in a way, but I mean, I'm hoping that as I concluded my talk, that the more we know about the human mind and how it works. I mean, since we don't know what consciousness is yet, although there are people that claim that they, you know, have figured it out, but it isn't. It's a huge question that the most learned scholars have not settled, and it's very, very It's gonna be very hard. We may never understand it totally. But if we don't start understanding consciousness and how our minds work and everything, I don't think we're gonna unlock this puzzle about why we have developed this religion, belief systems. They're almost all pervasive in some way or another.
Another talk perhaps is related is why do religions die out?
That would be interesting.
What is
But
the
I'm
purpose?
not sure, this is interesting, Norm, because I was just talking to Jim today, when other people were in those conferences, and, we were sitting out at the table, and, I'm realizing, I've thought about it a lot, but when I was reading, again, Freeman's Closing of the Western Mind, I'm going to Jim, why Christianity? And not the other ones. Why not Mithras, and why not, ISIS, and why not all these others, An art history teacher once suggested that one of the reasons that she thought, or what she had read, that the religion was based on the life and death really of a real, what they thought was a real person, rather than some mythological god.
But you mentioned it just a minute ago, it was the Roman Empire. That's what was able to spread it.
Well, yeah, but why did
Why
that?
did they accept it?
It was a crappy little sect. I'm just reading now what the pagans were saying about it, and, it was really a nothing little sect.
Slavery.
Yeah, and a lot of the Romans looked down on it because, that they were getting their converts from, the lower classes. And, these Roman patricians that were like learned in Greek philosophy and Roman philosophy just thought it was ridiculous. They called it a superstition. And they called Judaism that also, so, but they, of course, they were rooted in some superstition, although many of them, the more enlightened ones didn't really believe in the gods.
But that's how you would translate their word,
Yeah,
superstition.
yes, that's what I'm reading, and I'm sure that the people I'm reading are, they seem to know the language very well, so, yeah, they called it a superstition. Pliny the Younger, that's the first time we come across a Roman talking about Christians, and he was a governor of a large area, and he's writing back to the emperor about different things, like, what do we do, like, let's establish a fire department here, and Trajan writes back, no, because they form these clubs and then they become seditious. So just give them the equipment and let them deal with it.
Everybody deal with yourself.
Yeah, let the crowds, he actually said the crowds that gather around, let them help out with the equipment.
Wow.
Yeah, so, it was interesting, but, Pliny writes, and actually he acted before he got the message back from the emperor, which makes us think that he knew it was gonna be okay, because he always like dotted his I's and crossed his T's properly. And, he said actually he had found nothing, there were rumors all the time that the Christians were eating babies and draining their blood and committing incest, and I think that's because they called each other brother and sister, and things, and, I don't, just imagine any kind of like crazy thing, the sexual rights, that were like really far out, but that's what they were accused of. And he actually writes back to the emperor, and he said he found that they were meeting just like the other groups that generally were having a meal together and maybe some wine and, having procedural things, and he called it a superstition. But they were concerned a little bit because mainly it was because the residents in that area, they weren't persecuting Christians per se. It was just sporadic, and the people in that area were really fed up with them. And they were complaining and complaining and complaining. So he brought them in and he gave them like 3 chances, and if they were adamant, the Romans a lot of times for obstinacy would like send people to be executed. So he sent them to be executed. If they would sacrifice to the gods a little bit, that was the end of it. Okay, that's it, In fact, I'm trying to remember where the bishop was. It was Cyprian. Almost his whole congregation recanted. And then they had to decide who they were going to let back in. Because then Christians that would recant in a sporadic thing, then they would we want to be Christians again, And then they'd have to decide, well, is it okay? But what I'm trying to say is that there were a whole bunch of sects. Why this one? And nobody has come up with that real answer. Why? It's fascinating. Yeah, the emperor threw his power behind it and made it more or less a state religion, but how did it get to that point?
See, by then it had already spread.
Yeah, because he wouldn't have bothered with it. I
It
mean,
was, politically, it was the
they were in the
smart
majority
thing
in
to
many
do.
cities, yeah. Yeah, it was very smart for him to do. But why? How did they spread from nothing to that? And what happened to the other ones?
Was it the slave trade, that they were being sent all over the known world as slaves?
That's a good point.
Good.
But I don't think so, because, you know, really they were staying in their areas. Once they were slaves, they were usually, you know, kept in that area. They weren't transported all over. They were usually, you know, they were like usually spoils of war. That was frequently how slaves, you know, were taken at that time. It wasn't like a slave trade like we had in the, you know, 18th century. This is like people that they conquered frequently. And then also they would, children that were born as slaves frequently would then remain slaves, you know. Yes, it was a little different. No, I don't, there's no real reason. The empire was crumbling, but why this religion and not that one, you know?
You mentioned about religion has caused a lot of conflict and death.
Enormous.
But wasn't that because of the mixing that was beginning to happen, you know, from these empires, from the migrations of people throughout the empires that existed? But prior to that, there was a lot less conflict in those communities. I mean, so that if you were homogenous as a religion within your community, let's just use Egypt as an example, you know, BC, if you were homogenous, then what difference does it make? You wouldn't be in conflict if everyone was the same.
Yeah, you're right, but then what do you do with Greece and Rome?
So then they came into Egypt, right?
But yeah, but they were like very, very, well, they were pretty tolerant of
And-
different religions.
Okay.
You would generally not be persecuted, you know.
Yes, and their motives weren't religious. Their motives, right, were conquest for booty and land.
Yeah,
Right.
you mean the Romans like.
Yeah, so to say that religion is the cause of all of the conflicts and death,
Okay,
I think you have to qualify that even as an atheist and say
Okay.
that that happened because we ended up migrating to lands that we hadn't been in before because of conflicts that didn't originate from religion.
okay, yeah, yeah, as a matter of fact, the Romans were usually very careful unless the religion seemed seditious in some way, usually not to
Yeah,
upset the religion
but
of the
look what they
country.
did to the Jews, twice.
Yeah, but you
They-
know what, I mean, you know, that was happening because of a lot of sedition and a lot of discontent,
Yeah,
you know, among the Jews, and it made the Romans nervous.
yes it did.
That wouldn't have happened ordinarily. As a matter of fact, a lot of the Jewish priests from the establishment temple tried to keep that from happening because they liked their position and they liked the peaceful things. And most people, you know, where the Romans went in to conquer, most people did like that. It's like, well, you know, we gotta pay some taxes,
Yeah.
but, you know, they're not bothering any of our customs,
Yeah.
you know?
It's quite interesting, yeah, because I've been reading about that period because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so twice the Romans went in and
Yeah.
wiped out Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So it's unique in that history.
But you notice it was like, you know, like partly brought on by the, you know, the behavior of the Jews who were
Yeah.
getting like really fed up with the Romans. And the Romans were not always like good guys. They could be very brutal, you know, obnoxious people. But they usually were pretty careful because they wanted to keep peace, you know, the Pax Romana. They wanted to keep the peace, and they found that they could keep the peace by not, you know, bothering the people's local customs, even sometimes their laws. You know, but Roman law, of course, always superseded, but they didn't bother themselves too much.
I have some comments now. You know, you make the argument that religion was not adaptive, but wouldn't it be more accurate to say that at one time it must have been adaptive, but it is no longer adaptive?
You know, I'm not sure about that. How adaptive was it? Or is it some kind of like appendage that, you know, we like to tell stories,
Yeah,
and we like fiction, we like art, and this is like huge among humans. We love storytelling and we love narrative. Did we make up some stories and then come to believe them because they were more comforting? I don't have any answer, but I suspect that we could have probably been just as adaptive another way, like, what's his name? Oh my God. He wrote the Leviathan. Hobbes, where he talked more about the social contract. Now, I think he said that it was enforced, by belief in God too, but it was basically, people got tired of living, what he called, life was, nasty, brutal, short, or whatever.
Too short.
I care, yeah. So, he had the theory that people just got tired of living like that and started, like forming groups and agreeing and having laws, somewhat enforced by religion. So, yeah, it was probably adaptive in that sense. Did you need it? I'm not sure.
Well, that's why I don't think it helps our position to speculate about what might have been, instead of religion, just to say, this is what was in the human.
But it was almost maladaptive from the beginning in some aspects.
I think that's a tough case to make, I really do. I think that, because it's in every culture and because it brought other advances in the arts and technology,
Sure.
in trade, had some aspects, religion. When you're trying to spread your religion, you're also spreading your culture, your trade, your other ideas.
Yeah, I agree,
So,
yeah, you've got a good point.
you
You've
know-
got a good point, but at the same time, it was always like persecutory. It was very seldom did you have the half tolerance that the Greeks had.
Yeah, but that was also.
And even that was, if you were like too far off the beaten track, they would accuse you of atheism, even if you weren't atheistic. Even if you just believed in a different system that was too
Yeah.
far off.
Okay.
I don't know, there was always this sense of, if you get too far off the beaten track, even in those primitive things, you ended up dead.
Yeah, I mean.
So maybe it had an adaptive thing for the entire society.
Yeah, but you see, that's the only thing in the evolutionary world, that's really the only thing that matters, not the individual.
Okay, yeah, all right.
And actually, that brings me to my next comment, because Freud was talking, again, about group fantasy, and wish fulfillment was the group fantasy, not the individual fantasy. That's what I would answer to Platinga, that this idea that some of the religion is not wish fulfillment,
Yeah.
but as a group, it is. It is
Yeah.
a strong identity, for justice,
Yeah.
for punishment,
Yeah.
for, identity and for honor, reward of the
Yeah.
group pride is all wrapped up in the group fantasy. And that's what, when Freud was writing about Future of the Illusion and these other writings that he did about, for the masses, civilization and its discontents, he was really then taking individual psychology and applying it to group psychology, see? So he wasn't talking about an individual who might suffer as a result of religion, so much as how the group, may have benefited from these fantasies, but ultimately we have to grow out of our fantasies, even the group,
Yeah.
see? And so others, people in the modern times have written in the same way, is that we're not talking about individual suffering, we're talking about the group adaptation benefits, the net benefit to some of these fantasies are positive, but in individual cases, of course, they're not. So I think it's important not to lose sight of that.
Okay, well, that's a
And
good point.
even to the
That's a good point.
subgroups, even to the little subgroups within a certain religion.
Yeah.
They can, life is miserable. And sometimes short.
But I think of Hinduism with the untouchables,
Mhm.
their lives are miserable, but as a collective, as a group, it still survives
Yeah, but it's
because it serves a purpose.
starting to pass away though,
From
in
other,
the
from
modern
outside
world.
influences,
Yeah.
yes.
yeah, in the modern world.
It served a purpose. The same thing with the foot binding in China.
Yes.
When they bind the feet of these girls,
Mhm.
in a closed society, it actually served a purpose. But in an open society, in a more open or more
Yeah, but what purpose do you
cosmopolitan,
think it served other than that the men
Procreation.
thought it was, sexy?
was just comes to mind, procreation is the idea that
Mhm.
these were baby factories that didn't need to leave the house.
All right, yeah, I can see that, yeah. But the binding, I mean, you know, the women in ancient Greece, unless they were hetera or whatever, there was a certain category where they were almost like prostitutes, but they were like the ones that were well educated or educated themselves. You know, lived free. Other women just stayed in the house almost all the time. They did have a large role in the house because they wove things that, you know, their house wore, and sometimes they sold the extra even when they were patricians and what have you, or aristocrats, but women were like, you know, very oppressed.
And they weren't educated.
No, very little, very little. The ones that were educated were the ones that were like mistresses of powerful men. And they had their own, you know, category, but that was like a dangerous route to take. You might not make it, you know. So it was very daring, you know, and intelligent women that took that route. But the norm was not to, you know, they were oppressed in the house, but they didn't bind their feet, let's say. So the Chinese had this like extra thing where it
Well,
was,
the women
it was
would run away.
Yeah, maybe that's
another
what
thing.
they were afraid of, yeah. But I mean, a
Well,
lot of
more-
it was, at least they put it to the fact that the woman's feet were more attractive, that they were more sexual.
Delicate.
And delicate like that.
Yeah, and that's what, you know, I know about this because of the circumcision issue.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the same nonsense. You mentioned this model of the mind, but you didn't point out that that has been, you know, refuted, that it's really been discredited.
It actually, it hasn't though, in evolutionary psychology, they're all keeping the module. I don't
But-
accept it at all,
But
it's silly.
that's just a very limited
Yeah, it's silly. But it's
population.
very popular.
But the neuroscientists wouldn't say
Yeah,
that.
no,
Neuroscientists.
they won't.
So, I mean, they have the evidence. The evidence
Yeah.
was gonna rule.
I agree, but
Yeah.
you know what, I mean, it's still prevailing as kind of a myth in our society. It's
Yeah,
very
but you-
hot still.
But you didn't point out that it is a myth.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
guess I really should have. I think, didn't I mention it in, if I didn't, I erred in my talk on psychology. Because I covered
Okay.
evolutionary psychology more thoroughly there.
Okay, yes, you did, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this idea came from the computer world, that you could just model the computer, the brain after a computer, and it's
I
not.
see why they thought that, because,
It's nonsense.
you know, we invented the computer, as it were, so it must be an imitation of our minds.
Yes.
And, you know, it's like a silly idea. No, I'm
Right.
glad, but it's not discredited enough, believe me, in the evolutionary psychology circles.
And but it's no coincidence that it came about at the same time as the computer came to the fore.
Yeah, exactly. It's
So-
very funny, the explanations that we overlay.
Yes,
Mhm.
we overlaid it,
Yeah.
yes, that's a good
That's the problem.
description.
Got a lot of great questions tonight.
Yeah, I mean.
As usual.
I had the comment again, that Freud really relied on the idea that children are just another primitive people, that primitive societies and cultures are similar to the children.
Children, yeah.
To the children who have the belief that the moon is following them
Yeah.
because they're traveling in the car. I don't know if he probably used the car, that they're traveling, that he didn't do the studies, I'm sure, that were really necessary to prove that.
Well, you see how
But-
ethnocentric that is, that primitives, because actually
is following me.
when Levi-Strauss and other, researchers like really looked at these, they found that they have different ways of classifying. That's all. I mean, we have what we consider a more sophisticated way of classifying. But even the Chinese cultures, which were very sophisticated, they had a different way of classifying, like animals and things. Sometimes it was analogical rather than, our means of classifying. And
What does
the
that mean?
primitive, well, they would like group things together that we would not.
Based on some other function.
Yeah, it was really interesting, to see that, and it makes no sense when you see it, even if you're being told that, you can see like maybe why they did it, but it's so alien to our way of classifying. But you see, human beings have a lot of ways of classifying, not just our Western way, And primitive man had their own way of classifying, that's all, so it wasn't like children.
Okay.
That's what they found out, so.
But isn't that the political correctness of modern times to say, oh, the primitive peoples had some wisdom that we have lost.
I don't think I don't think that they mean wisdom, it's just that they had a different way of classifying.
Yeah,
They weren't childlike, it was just a different way. I mean, the Chinese were highly sophisticated, these Eastern cultures were highly sophisticated. They classified things differently. That's all. That they arrived at a certain kind of classification, and why that happened and here and there, and,
So-
you know. But
so you would dismiss Freud's position then about that children are analogs to primitive peoples?
yeah, I would. I don't think that they really are.
Read that. And just another comment is on E.O. Wilson, is that he mentions that there's evidence of ritual burials as far back as 30,000 years ago, that they have evidence of things put into the grave,
Yeah.
that the body was positioned in certain ways,
Yeah.
that this had to be a ritual and not just somebody being dumped into
No,
a pit.
I agree, I
But
agree.
I like that explanation about how they had to discard the body, even though it was their loved one, they couldn't stand to be around it
Right.
anymore. So they had to dispose it, and then in order to assuage their guilt, they had to do it in a ritual way.
Right. And also
Very good.
too, I mean, you know, when they were putting, you know, stuff in the grave, sometimes it was like to take to the next world. So I think that these ideas of an afterlife were very,
The bow and arrow for
Yeah.
good hunting.
yeah, it was interesting, but you know, trying to, what's his name? Pinker, Steven Pinker, you know, how the mind works and everything. He has said that he can't come up with a single one idea for, you know, religion. He said he has absolutely no idea, and, you know.
But
he's
why
an
does it have
atheist.
to be one single idea?
Yeah, it doesn't, that's why I ended my talk there.
Yeah.
He said about, you know, it was interesting, he said like, how did they get the idea of immortality? Some of it might have been from elders, he was being funny, but it's not so funny. You wanna keep your power, and you wanna, you
Yeah.
know, no matter how old and weak you're getting, you're gonna be around forever. And then, of course, dreams.
Dreams, of
That's what a
course.
lot of, you
Yeah.
know, you dream of the
Mhm.
person.
And it feels very
Yeah.
real.
Yeah,
Wilson
Yeah.
mentioned that.
yeah, that's really
Mhm.
important, I think, yeah,
Very good.
yeah.
Okay, fine, sounds
You
good
don't
to
have
me.
anything to
All right.
contribute?
No, you want me to wrap it up?
Yeah, if you want to, yeah.
Just a little tag that, going all the way back to the Romans now and challenging the Christians, share with Norm that funny argument that they came up with about
Which
the group speaking, Jesus was speaking to groups all
Oh
over
my
the-
gosh, yeah,
performing
actually, I
for-
found out that it was, when I was reading today, I don't know if you're familiar with Lucian, but he wrote the Golden Ass, and it's a satire, he made fun of everybody. And he makes fun of the Christians because, and actually then I found out that a lot of people at that time had that idea, that didn't embrace Christianity, that he said that, well, Jesus supposedly was like preaching when nobody believed in him, he was preaching to everybody. But then when he after he died and supposedly came back and he wanted everybody to believe in him, he only appeared to like, you know, one woman and a few disciples, you know, who already believed in him. I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, it doesn't occur to us today, but like, so why didn't he appear to like people that, you know, like.
And even the Roman soldiers who were guarding, supposedly guarding the tomb.
Yeah,
Conveniently fell asleep.
yeah. We don't even know if that story's true then.
Well, of course not.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
listen to the argument.
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I
They
mean,
have
they
an
might have been
answer.
bribed and the body may have been taken away.
Yeah.
And yet they didn't really believe women were very truthful. So,
Yeah, that's what's puzzling
yeah,
about
They
it.
thought women were the weaker vessel,
Were
really.
the not reliable
Yeah,
ones. But,
not reliable.
No, they had an answer for it, I forget.
I'm sure of it because they come up with an answer for everything, but, you know, I mean, I think Lucian's good sense, you know, shows through in that. And apparently a lot of pagans thought that too.
That argument,
They dismissed, you know, the resurrection, as it were, because,
Yeah.
you know, he didn't show himself to many people.
But I still feel that anyone looking at the last 10,000 years would predict that religion is going to die out. That there's no other way to look at it, but to look at it from that long view. That there's no way it's going to survive, because if it was adaptive at one time, it certainly is less and less
Well,
adaptive.
it's horribly ill-adapted now,
So,
not adapted.
To say that, oh, because, you know, you talk to some people and they still hold on to their beliefs, that's just a short-term view. That's not the long-term view is those beliefs are not
Well, I
sustainable.
believe that, it's just that I don't wanna argue with them right now, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not sustainable, and they keep evolving themselves, you know, and they are looser and looser in their belief system, like they don't, a lot of them really don't believe in hell that much anymore, and, you know.
It's dissipating.
And
Yeah.
isn't that itself an evolution?
Yes,
See?
yes, it is, yeah.
Towards-
Yeah, people are saying that if, and you can see it when, you know, I'm reading these old theological arguments by like some very heavy church fathers, how much religion has changed. It isn't the same, you know, they
Right.
think it's like this, you know, we
Yeah.
go back centuries, it isn't.
Yeah, the Jews would say the same thing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And
we
it's
have
not
to-
the same.
Yeah, it isn't the same,
Yeah.
it's totally different.
Yeah, even you go back 300 years. it's-
Yeah, if somebody came, or even 100 years in a way, if somebody came like from, you know, the past and looked at it, they would not recognize their religion, they would probably be horrified if they were true believers.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
they say, oh my God, I've been thrown in a bunch of heretics, you know, apostates.
It adapts to the secular culture and the secular thought.
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
Very
And
good.
science has
Excellent.
like driven it like
That's
further
it.
and further.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks again, man.